Taking its sweet time. Okay, I'm trying to see if we are seen going live. Yes, we should be seen. Now I need to pop out my chat. So it takes a fun few seconds here getting everything ready. And my chat window is quite large.
I'm envious.
Hmm. Okay, TVS, I do not see you in chat yet.
Zoom chat or YouTube chat?
YouTube chat.
I'm not seeing your live stream.
Okay, it is live. I can see it.
Okay, I can't find it. I'm seeing all your videos.
You'll have to keep
Oh,
refreshing until you find it.
all right. There we go. Okay, got it. Okay. All right. Live now.
Really, all of life were that easy.
Hmm.
Just keep refreshing until you find it.
GVS, you've got to mute your mic. Okay, now I don't see the chat on. DVS, if you could type something into the chat box, that would be spectacular. Okay, now I don't see the chat on. We are getting it sorted out.
No worries.
I
This is
just
still Canaveral.
I just realized that I needed a second monitor here for my YouTube. So okay. All right, we've got GVS in place, and I'm here, and I can't. I know. I need to switch. There we are. And now things should be going reasonably well. Okay, so Talkin' Taboo podcast. We are getting started here, and we have the honor of interviewing Marissa and I'm gonna say it wrong. Corinne. Did I get it
Oh,
right?
yeah. That's Corinne.
Success.
I know.
Okay. Very happy. So we're talking about all things transgender today. But before we get started, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I can do that. I'll start.
Okay.
My name is Marissa, and I am a transgender woman, meaning transitioning. I'm in the process of transitioning from male to female, and I've been going for about 2 years now in my transition, almost. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I think we'll, just reveal more as we go through the podcast.
Okay,
Okay.
you're all set?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. My name is Corinne. I'm 63 years old. I'm a white MTF. female, and I have been at this about since the age of 13. And finally, about 50 years later, I will be getting an initial appointment with the surgeon in October. So it's been a long journey for me too, and it's not over.
Excellent and welcome. I'm really glad to have you here today. So,
Mm-hmm.
a while ago at a munch, we had a conversation, and it was kind of off the cuff, and I kind of want to recapture some of that. And I know that one of the things I started out with was asking about terminology. And I asked
Mm-hmm.
if trans women like to be called women or trans women. Which is it, and does it depend on region, or does it depend on?
Women always works.
Oh
That's
yeah.
the best. If you don't know with somebody, and it's, they seem to be presenting as female, and they give you their name, like a female name. Going with women, you can't go wrong, really. Some I do refer to myself as a trans woman fairly often. It's just a personal, just how I identify, but I can only speak for myself, of course, but it seems kind of common, but certainly if someone addresses me as woman, plainly and simply, that is really actually quite great. It's pretty validating, um, and it's accurate. So
Good.
that's probably the best for me. You can't go wrong with woman. That's my kind of take on that. What do you think, Corinne?
I would agree, definitely. The only thing that's really going to be offensive is being called a man. Um,
Yeah.
and fortunately, in our travels, that's not happening too often. But that's the thing that's annoying. And then they're continuing to put up an argument about it afterwards for whatever their ideological or religious or political reasons. Um, and but as far as being called a woman, I'm fine with that. As far as being called a trans woman, that's cool. T girl, okay. TG, yeah. Um, I understand that there's a large segment of the population of T's who disapprove of the term transsexual, which was kind of what I walked around with for a long time in my life. And I guess after the last 10 or 15 years, that's kind of frowned upon. So that's a surprise to me. But it doesn't bother me to be called that either. So the only thing that can really bother me pretty much is people refusing to use my name, or playing with it in foolish ways that aren't necessary, or refusing to acknowledge my pronouns. And I do go by she, hers, hers, and it's just that simple, folks. You know.
I think one term that's definitely questionable is, and I'm surprised to see it in some social media circles, but Gmail. That one
Mm-hmm.
is, it's a real like shaking my head kind of moment every time I encounter that. And it's not, the context I see it in doesn't seem to be mean spirited at all. Specifically, not too specifically. How specifically can we get about websites? I don't know.
If it is a public website that anyone can use, you can be specific. If you need membership login and
Yeah.
there's some assumption of privacy, I would be more vague, please.
Okay. All right. Well, there is such a there are membership sites that exist that one can go online, um, generally for kink type things and fetishes and so forth. And it's a common practice to use Gmail, and I think it has to do with fetishization. I stumble over that word a bit.
It's okay.
Of
Yeah.
trans people, particularly trans women.
I think it's a designation that's not applicable to every day, to real life. And we are real
Right.
life people. She-males are a designation of somebody's fantasy. They're a fetish. It's, been around in magazines and DVDs for a long time as a porn and fetish term. And, what that points back to, what that should point to, if you're going to use that term, is the fact that so many trans people like us, especially those who are trying to really make a go of it and pass and are moving on to the surgery and so forth. She-male reflects that often the only way trans people have been able to support themselves is in the sex industry,
Mm-hmm.
where they're labeled as prostitutes and deviants and whatever else have you. And that's barely beginning to change in any way. And of course, we have a huge political force at work in the country right now trying to reverse all of that. So that's also challenging.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, she-male is, I don't consider that appropriate to me. And I'd probably gently correct somebody. And say, well, no, I'm not really a she-male. I'm a trans, and I'm a woman. So we can keep the male out of it, except for when it's part of female. I think that's the other part
Also,
of the term that it's cute because it emphasizes the male by using the word she, and that's really even more annoying.
I agree. And T-girl is another one I'm kind of on the fence on. That one, you mentioned that one a few
Yeah,
moments ago. And that one kind of sexualizes us as well. It seems
yeah,
to be used primarily in that context and or
hmm,
trivializes even.
right,
Really nothing worse than trivializing our way of life, the way of our being as some kind of year-round Halloween,
yeah, yeah.
and say, oh well, it's just dress up or whatever, like no,
Mhm.
I went and legally changed my name last year. Uh,
Yeah, I have a mother
Get my
who's kind of
documents
playing
back.
around in that dream world right now. Yeah, um, and that does make it difficult because, as Marissa's pointing out, there are always going to be a few people who don't take you seriously about it at all, no matter, they'll ask you questions, but then they'll come back later and say, yeah, well, you're really just a guy in a dress, or they're intimating that, and there are always a few people around who are going to just do that because they want to prove they haven't been taken in, you haven't deceived them in
Mm-hmm.
some way.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's so neither here nor there that you just wonder where this even comes from. Um, well, it comes from a culture where they're constantly being deceived on every level from every angle, practically. And then you come along and you're trying to say, but I honestly am a woman. I know you see this and that, but that's not all there is to see here. It's a round world. It looks flat, and I'm a woman who doesn't quite look like a woman. Can we do this? No, not always. So there are a lot of people who want to keep to simpler answers, no matter what, and even explaining that there are genetic events that can occur at any time in a child's development that can bring about a change of identification of gender, changes in hormones, changes in the way certain genes are lining up.
Mm-hmm.
So much can really go on. It's not a flawless method of creating human beings. It's just the one that works on this planet. Um, so that's me for now. Over to you, Marissa.
Thank you. So yeah, thinking about the whole uh, identity thing. I came out to my family and coworkers and just the general population of the world, I guess, last year, a little over a year ago now. And so far, my experience has been positive, but I definitely fear the day when I've managed to get along pretty far without getting a serious slur thrown at me, in a public place.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard things like muttered behind me and like stores and parking lots, but um, I'm not looking. I'm sure it will happen at some point. I'm not looking forward to it. It'll probably feel violating and traumatic, because it's a kind of an attack on your person. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I've, before a transition, I went through my entire life till I was 47. Pretty much a very, I dressed very, jeans, t-shirt, kind of muted colors. I kind of blended in the background. Like I could be somewhere and no one would not know I was there. So I was always invisible and, out of, people didn't see me or notice me. So they weren't kind of, now I feel like I stand out a little bit, in public and because I can't help it. But it's been fine, just an interesting adjustment to make just in day-to-day life. Um, it's just getting used to presenting oneself as one's true self in the world, just in everyday life. Um, so
Mm-hmm.
it's a little bit
Yeah.
of, there's an awareness that I have that I'm out somewhere in public that I never really used to have before. Constant awareness of who's around me, how many people, what type of people they might be, and are people violent, drunk, sketchy in some way. I feel like I always have to watch myself a lot more than I did before, especially reading about, when I encounter statistics like the murder rate for transgender folks, particularly transgender folks of color, uh, has already surpassed last year's figure in the U.S. and it's only 7 months in for stats. So
Well, it's 8 months
that,
now.
yeah, but we
Yeah.
haven't, only 2/3 of the way through the year, and we've already
Yeah.
surpassed because there's people I think feel emboldened to do more hateful acts on all kinds of people, LGBTQ, etc. Yeah, persons of
Mm-hmm.
color, and and so forth, because of the political climate we've been enduring the last close to 4 years now, and so that we're hopefully the tide will turn very soon with politically, with the administration and so forth. But it only took 4 years for things to really deteriorate in terms of people feeling emboldened to be hateful and very public about it. On a positive
Mm-hmm.
side, we have a lot of younger people who are very accepting of people who are trans or non-binary. I think upcoming and younger generations are just have a viewpoint. They've really been aware of um, us folks the entire time they've been near or at adulthood. So that's helps probably frame your perspective, and definitely a positive trend. Um, just wasn't really very noticeable 10, 15 years ago.
Right. Yeah. I was certainly feeling it myself, just constantly staying below the radar as much as possible. 15 years, 25 years ago. Um, and it took a while to crawl out from under that. And now that I have, to the point where I'm, I did a year test because I was still going with the tried and true old ways of going through gender transition. They were saying gender reassignment before that. Now it's gender confirmation,
Mm-hmm.
which almost sounds like a religious event, but okay. And I was, I get a little dress for my gender confirmation. I have to go with my other dresses. Um, anyway, um, usually getting back to the 1 year test, I went through that and I started out, dressing full time as a woman all the way. And at some point, at a group of trans people, that's run by the Pride Center. This one young trans woman, about 18 or 19, very hip and up with it, said, we don't really have to do that life test thing anymore. And I said to myself, okay, but there's no need for you to marginalize it either, because when I was going through this, that was not an easy thing to do. And I've been living as a woman now since, this is the 4th year, since 2017. And it has, in a lot of ways, gotten a lot easier. In our little neighborhood here, we're up in North Buffalo on a pretty easygoing side street. There are people here I've known for 20 years and longer, and they're all very supportive. There isn't anybody I can point to anywhere in my neighborhood who's a potential trouble spot. A lot of good people. We spend a fair amount of time at a place called the Central Park Grill on Main Street, because 3 blocks away from it's just right up at the end of our street on Main Street. And now I'm giving away where we are. But the crowd in that place is very relaxed and very pretty liberal. If we're there and somebody starts to object to our presence or starts saying things, very often somebody else will tell them, listen, we don't do that here. So it's nice to at least know a bar in the area where, the general code of conduct is, listen, we don't accept outing people or, downing them in any way. We accept everybody, all colors, all creeds, all flavors of gender. So there are more places like that, but you kind of have to watch it. Other places around town or in other towns, like North Tonawanda, right, Marissa?
Oh yeah, yeah. There, yeah. There was a little bit of an incident we had up there. We walked into a place and just felt kind of like we were being looked over and looked at, and we just got the vibe we should just turn around and leave. Right on the main street. I mean, this establishment was right out there, but we did not feel. We just looked at each other and walked out. Like, okay, nope, not doing this. And then, yeah, definitely, yeah. Even the parking area was unfriendly.
Yeah, I think we ran into an overage bully there.
Yeah, we had somebody who, I think we got marked, as not really from around there or or something, and just people have to get on our case, over a parking spot we were actually just leaving, which was really bizarre. But at any rate, yeah. I think in the city, I think living in the city limits of Buffalo people are generally pretty cool. If you're in Allentown or downtown, Elmwood Village, Parkside, people are, generally pretty cool. As you get further out into the suburbs and the far outlying areas of Erie County, it's feel like just gotta be a little more careful of your surroundings and just watchful, what's going on. So
yeah, and I have thought for a long time. As a single
woman, I don't think I'd go into a bar alone.
There you go.
To some random bar out in the suburbs, and I would totally feel comfortable doing that in our neighborhood bar. I mean, everyone knows me there. There's gonna be at least 2 or 3 people that know me there. I'm gonna go in, so that's that. Even so, there's a number of places that I feel I could go to in the city that are, gonna be pretty chill people, especially in Allen Street.
Yeah. But I think the thing is that going through life as a trans woman, you have to have the awareness of a woman. It doesn't matter what your origin is. Women really, for the most part, live with low-level fear in their lives all the time. Um, and there's just an awful lot of violence coming out against women, especially. And then it branches out certainly to trans women and trans men for various reasons. It's weird to see such a tidal wave of misogyny starting to tower out on the ocean surface, and it's coming in, and it's like, my God, the guy we have running this country has really opened the floodgates to something pretty ugly here, especially about this country.
Yeah.
And I think that's a shame because really there's no excuse for it, and there's been this sort of low grade battle of the sexes for a long time now. They started talking about it jokingly in the early 1920s with the beginnings of the success of the suffrage movement. Actually, by then, so now women weren't subservient and servile. They were actually, wanting their own self-direction. They want autonomy. They want the final say in balancing the checkbook because you don't know what the hell you're doing. Which was an argument that surfaced at my house, and it's appeared in literature. Women eventually want control of the funds of the house because that's the only way you stop losing money. I don't know if that's true of every household now, but I think in some ways that's true most places. So, but I think that's part of it. But I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask if we could touch on one more question on terminology.
Okay.
How do you like your
Yeah.
anatomy being referred to? And I'm calling on my personal experiences teaching classes and not having the right words and panicking and saying something really dumb.
Well,
Yeah, no, I
my first
just think
question would be under what contexts would it be
well, I'd ask
being
that
brought
too.
up?
Yeah.
Um,
Because it could simply be not at all appropriate to even, I'd say, refer to it as not at all, please, in some cases. But so that would depend on someone who's going to ask out of the blue, like on a dating site.
no,
Someone types in,
I'm personally asking for classes when an organizer is teaching classes.
okay,
Okay.
okay.
Because I believe that I had been talking about prostates at the time.
I would go with that. Just stay with the clinical terms. I
Yeah, yeah.
certainly wouldn't use slang terms. I would not use cute euphemisms or something like that. If we're talking two people in a serious environment, whether it's younger and maybe in a certain way to some extent, especially younger people, we're not talking about, the kuka or somebody's, you know, whatever, gash or something. None of that.
Right.
You're going to, it's a penis, it's a vagina. There's a clitoris in there too. You don't know what that is. Well, it's very important that you find that out. But I'm not going to show that to you with this class.
Yes. Yeah.
Something like that. But now I have two daughters. Actually, I have a daughter and I have a non-bino person, and they are both very bright. They started reading very young, and when it came to books, we had a huge Time Life book of life. No, it was the Life book of conception, pregnancy, and delivery, and very, very good illustrations of all sorts. And when the girls wanted to know how a baby was made, at about the age of 5, each of them, right around there, we explained it to them. And within a couple of years, after they asked enough questions, they could tell us more about it than we could tell them. And I think that's exactly the way it should be. There's no reason not to teach children, girls especially, about their bodies and what their bodies do. Better to have no surprises either way, as you go on.
And that is a that is a wonderful thing now. Unfortunately, people my age were raised with the book with the cut paper chickens and
Oh,
still have
mm-hmm.
some hang-ups. I mean, do you know what book I'm talking about with like the cut paper chickens and the eggs and
I
I
recall
I
there
don't.
was an animation or something like that at one point, wasn't there? Way back when. It's just trying to really do a very sanitized issue of the yeah. And I think sanitizing and boundarizing what people should talk about out in the open is just never a good idea.
I
You
agree.
know, and the sooner you demystify all of that stuff, the less you're going to see things like the behavior where, you know, the girls are talking to themselves about this and that and looking at the anatomy pictures and sniggering. And that's, I don't see that as particularly healthy development either. So let them know what it's all about. Um, you know, let them know what it all means to them. And while you're at it, put in a dose of, and sometimes boys are going to try to get you to da 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 da. And don't just do it with some dumb boy. Take time with us. And to the best of my knowledge, they certainly have. So, um, but I think as far as terminology, as it pertains to me in my life, I simply would just say the very basic terms. You know, just refer to, you know, yes, I'm going to have a vagina sometime early next year, hopefully. That's what's coming up. Finally, um, if that's what you're asking, after all that she asked, if that's what you're asking,
Well,
I would
yes, the
agree.
yeah,
terminology, yes.
right, okay,
I would agree with clinical terms myself as well. That makes the most sense. Just straightforward, simple. You know, penis, vagina.
mm-hmm.
That's plain and simple and accurate.
Yeah,
So, on to the right to refuse healthcare laws. How do they affect you?
the right to refuse healthcare laws.
Hmm.
Do we have laws in effect in this state to that effect?
No,
That
not
are,
in this state. No.
well, fortunately, yeah, that's what I thought you were talking about, because those are in effect in a few other states of the union, and I think it's scurrilous. You know, it's sexist, it's dangerous, and I'm sure somebody could make a case for it being unconstitutional. So let's hope that kind of thing stops. That used to be a lot more prevalent in various ways, and for every reason from you don't have insurance to you don't look right. So hopefully there's some improvement in that regard.
I'm
Well,
asking, so the reason I'm asking is for for people who may not know to understand how catastrophically this can affect your life. From I have a friend who is who will no longer travel to certain states to visit friends or family because they are afraid that if there's an accident, car accident, they'll be denied medical care.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
yeah, good.
yeah, and often that does tie blatantly right in with on religious grounds. They're defending their religious freedom by doing that, which is such an illogical boondoggle to begin with. I don't see how doing an execrable act safeguards your religious freedom. It makes no sense to me. So it's a shame that
Yeah.
this individual is not visiting such unsafe places, but it'll probably have to be that way for a little while, unfortunately, because there's a very hardcore element in this country that's going to stick to its guns as far as insisting that we're not really people and that we're, you know, mutilated males or we're freaks or we're something else. And that's going to be firmly implanted in their heads. And you just got to try and stay away from them as much as possible. And it gives me one more reason to stay in New York State because I've never encountered anything like that. In fact, thank God. And
Well,
I've
I
been
want to.
able to,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
I just want to say I want a list of those states are, because I wouldn't want to travel to them either. Now that you mention it, I mean, someplace where I could be refused healthcare, that's,
Mhm.
yeah, it's very dangerous. And if I could help avoid being in those geographical locations, that's,
Mhm. Mhm.
oh, it could be vital,
We'll
and
do
I
some
think
research.
also it's a springboard
Mhm.
for denying, depicting, you can cherry pick the kind of medical care they can refuse to you. Just, for instance, they'll treat your broken leg or a car accident, but if you need hormones during an extended stay in a facility, they won't give them to you. You won't have it with you. They could refuse certain types of health care based on the same grounds they claim to have. And I think that is actually far more common in a number of states. I am constantly seeing on Reddit and other channels people who live in certain areas, if they're young, particularly if they're like still at home or dependent in some way, they can't get anything in terms of hormones or even good counseling. The gender therapist they're supposed to go to will just turn out to be super religious and conservative and completely trying to pray the gay away, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um,
Conversion therapy. Yeah.
yeah. So in the guise of counseling for gender counseling,
Yeah.
so that I think is that sort of thing, and then, not offering hormone treatments, you, uh, for HRT, hormone replacement therapy, let alone any kind of surgery. Forget it.
Right. Mm.
That's going to be more. Still is more, unfortunately, widespread in this country.
So you touched earlier on being fetishized. Um, what are your feelings regarding that? And I'm asking coming from a point of, so I did grow up in a really weird place and was really repressed. And when I found sections of porn and of the BDSM lifestyle where fat people were fetishized, I was over the moon, um, because I was happy
Mm.
that somebody actually liked my body. And now I've come to the point where it's okay, but I'd rather you like me for me than my meat suit. But I'd like to hear how you felt about it when you first realized and how you feel now.
Well, I
Mm.
feel I have mixed feelings, somewhat along the lines that you mentioned. In my case, it's very, there's a certain aspect that is very kind of validating. It's like, oh, somebody finds me attractive, and for this particular quality or qualities that I have, and there is it's kind of hot. But at the same time, it's frustrating if you are like me. I'm looking to date and have a serious relationship, and the spaces where one tends to encounter people who have this fetishization, they're not really, let's face it, I'm not going to be the girl they take home to mama, it's,
Depends. Have you met Mama?
that's, these are not people who are, okay, they're there kind of for a good time and having fun, but they have no interest beyond like me as a person, liking me for me. Like the same kind of thing you mentioned, Sadie. Um, that's kind of, my mixed feelings on that.
I think that kind of comes out. It's an outgrowth of '60s free love, especially the way a lot of these groups operate, which is that it's not that fetish is the focus. That's not a problem. But setting aside that one aspect of you because it's exotic, it's different. and I want to try. I want to see what it's like to have sex with one. Um, you're sort of putting yourself on exhibition that way, or it sort of feels like the language is putting you there. But I think, and that's the thing, it's just one simple activity. People get together and do it, and it's another form of, in some ways, it's another form of anonymous sex, which is fine, but that begins to wear you down because, yeah, you feel like a specified implement for something, and then you're put back in the toolbox when it's over. And that's not necessary. There's no reason for you to feel like that any more than a genetic woman. We should feel that way when she's being, when she's in a relationship with somebody. And many women are made to feel that way. And since we're battling that tendency of society, it'd be nice to kind of not refer to human beings themselves as a type of fetish, which means you can get the schoolgirls out of there and cheerleaders and a lot of that and make it a little bit less fun. But, that's the other thing, because that's a trivial costume wearing. But what we are, call us she-males or what you will, though we prefer you not. This is not just trivial costume wearing. Okay, I'm not a Civil War reenactor. I'm, I get up in the morning, I'm Corinne. I go to bed at night, I'm Corinne. And that is how I live. And on the very rare occasions when I slip and start to refer to myself as a male, I suddenly go, no, that's not right. And that's very ingrained. But see, even, somebody like me will make an occasional mistake. But the fact of the matter is, it's real enough to me that, I'm not, it's not helpful to me for other people to trivialize my essential nature.
Thank you.
Yep.
So there were a couple of things that you requested to be able to talk about. And I want to get those in before we run out of time. Trans women in the kink community was one that one of you suggested. What is
We know
it?
who suggested that.
That sounds like it might have been one of mine.
I didn't want to point
But of
fingers.
course it is.
Guilty as charged. Well, so I think, and now I know I had mentioned that as something I did want to bring up, and what specifically now, of course, seems to have escaped me, but I do have a number of things that do float around in my mind all the time about this subject, and one of them is that really we kind of covered the fetishization already. It's actually a big part of that discussion. Really, it's part of the same that discussion segues into this nicely. The other thing that's interesting, though, is that there isn't as much. There's acceptance, but then there isn't within the kink community. A lot of practitioners and people who are at events and so forth, they don't really expect nor really desire to be doing any of their activities with trans people. Well, just, it can be blatantly obvious at times, like, it's just a kind of a trans exclusive affair, so to speak. And it's not overt, it's just kind of, like swingers clubs would be an example, like a perfect example of that. I've had discussions with folks who, both trans and not, who've been to swingers clubs and heard, stories, saw them online, and kind of caught the vibe from the various social media outlets that, I'm not really going to get just, participate in a lot of scenes in a swingers club because it's, it's really more cisgender couples and singles. That's kind of what the deal is with that. So, and there's a lot of um, areas of kink that kind of assume that it's not like there isn't acceptance. You know, there isn't like bashing or anything going on. It's just kind of exclusionary.
Hmm.
That's what it feels like. Um,
Kind of
so
like,
really,
oh, were you heading off that way? Okay, we're going to be continuing on this way. We'll catch you later on. Bye.
we're definitely, yeah, and we're definitely not seen as women. You know, when someone says they want a female to join them for a threesome, you know, or to have, you know, do some kind of BDSM type thing, they really mean cisgender.
Yeah.
And in some instances, they will go out and be very specific about that. You know, no trans, please, kind of thing. So, having said that, I will say that one of my motivations to of my, you know, kind of furthering my interest in kink, and besides the fact that it's just very interesting and I've been curious about it for many years and just hadn't done, you know, waited until my late 40s, but also because I kind of had the feeling that this, for a single person like myself, that it was a kind of a good group to get gravitate towards to, because they would be accepting, maybe more so than the vanilla community, as far as, you know, going on vanilla dating sites, for instance, to meet people. That's a whole other, you know, it really, my experience in the BDSM world, really in kink community, kind of mirrors vanilla dating and relationship type stuff. Um, and that's been my finding so far. And I
And
don't know, Corinne, what you have.
Corinne's experiences have been kind of narrow in this, but I think for the most part, I've had a little bit of club experience here and there where some guy sits down next to me and starts chatting me up. And it's gone either way as far as, his probing and then finally going, are you a trans? And it's like, well, yes, I am. And from there, it can go either way. It's like, oh, well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Off he goes.
mm,
Or he gets interested or much more interested. Um, and I don't think these guys are expecting someone would like me necessarily. There are a few flexible people out there. And now, not to say something disproportionate or something that sounds as though it's judgmental. It does seem as though, but we do notice that quite a fewer lesbians appreciate our presence when we're at a predominantly lesbian venue, milieu event, or something like that. And it's kind of like, nice to see you. We're kind of like not quite ready to talk to you, or that's fine if you want to be part of this, but we're going to be over here a little bit.
hmm.
And that's okay because I imagine that there's a different reason for everyone who's come to that place. Everybody's walked a somewhat different sexual road, and I should consider myself thankful not to have been caught in some of the places that they have, and that some of these women have been caught in their time. Or it's just a lifelong, deep-seated feeling that men are something just not to be fooled with. And so even, a woman who has a man chastity is still kind of not safe or not ideal for the setting or something like that. And you don't want to get involved with them. And it's like, okay, all right. Um, there are a few places where you do feel like an undesirable flavor. But at least I'm not licorice everywhere.
And dating while trans was the other one that was suggested. What are some
Yeah.
of the what are some of the difficulties you face?
Well, it's getting seems like they're trying to make this better, but primarily it's the assumption that most of the dating platforms, the major ones, as well as the dating pool out there, they kind of assume a binary gender, cisgender type environment. Um, it, they are finally offering gender inclusive options, such as trans or non-binary on some dating apps more than others, and they're some platforms are a little more suited than others, for someone like myself to try. But it's been very uh, challenging and somewhat discouraging because I don't really get uh, too many conversations going, let alone dates through any of these channels, because and there's some statistical backing that I've come across, and I haven't done a lot of research, but I've seen this more than once. But it's a type of survey where they asked, would you consider dating a transgender person? And something like 4% of males said yes, and about 2% of females. So given that, that's like taking my dating pool to 150 if its original size, right? Making it 50 times smaller, those are, suddenly become daunting odds. And that, of course, has been extremely frustrating during this time of COVID, where none of the traditional options, avenues for meeting people exist anymore, like just going to bars or clubs or what have you, even a coffee shop. Everything is socially distanced. So dating sites have become the de facto only platform. So in addition to the lack of response and really finding interested people on these dating apps and sites, a few times I've been approached or started conversations with women, and I'm primarily interested in women. I'm somewhat pansexual, but currently right now my interest is relationships with women. And when I would occasionally have a conversation, there were a couple that asked me straight up, do you have a penis? Do you still have a penis? Actually, that's how they worded it, meaning you better not have one now, right? And sure enough, as soon as I indicated the affirmative, they ghosted me, insta-ghost, or at least they said, well, okay, see you later, or something like that. Maybe another time of it ghosted. So I'm very upfront in my profile. I try to use sites that offer the option to list myself as trans. I'm very clear in my profile, and I have a little note at the end, a little disclaimer that says, if you need to ask about something to the effect of what I have down there, then I'm probably not the girl for you. And that seems to have quieted down the unqualified candidates. So now that means I virtually get no traffic at all coming to me. And I think I'm signing up for border right now. I feel like such a loser sometimes, but if I were interested in men, I would probably have a somewhat easier time. Seems to be the case. Corinne, I don't know if you have a handle.
You're pretty much the one who's dating. I'm, you're sort of being left to suffer the ordeal alone in a lot of ways. But I think I think you're absolutely right. Yeah. So I think most of the time we both had a very small amount of luck encountering people who didn't care about that, and were at least respectful of who we are as women, even though our equipment says different. But one was a trans, and the other is a male who's identifies as bi and is very much into this, that, and the other. And that's good enough for me, I guess. And I do like women myself, but you know, if a woman is not prepared for who I am, I'm not about to force myself on her. I tend to believe that there's still a few extraordinary specimens out there. There must be. I mean, I'm one. So, no, I like that. You know, if somebody calls me a freak, I like to say, well, that's a scientific term. You know, it just means an unusual specimen. Guilty as charged. So I think we don't have choice that some other people are open to at the moment, or at least it seems that way at this stage in our lives right now. Will it change? Actually, I think it will. I kind of think it will. I'm very much hoping the pendulum's starting to swing now. We'll see what happens after, was it January 20th? I think it's possible for the culture to get to a point where there really is gender fluidity and a degree of sexual fluidity. I think that happens in various times, various places around this country, but right now it's partly because of COVID and partly because of certain factors that are making a lot of people keep their heads down, because it has gotten slightly dangerous out there. It's just one of those things where you meet the people you meet along the road, and sometimes it works out, excitingly enough. But I really, most of my life, haven't done any kind of really organized dating. You know, it's usually I go out with the woman 2 or 3 times. She wants me to propose to her. I did do that twice. So.
Well, you know, I do hear that from a number of people that, you know, they met their partner not through traditional dating channels, either through friends or, you know, to someone they knew a long time from earlier in their life, like high school or college or something, that kind of thing. So, you know, there's that. I was married for almost 7 years, you know, to a woman, and well before I transitioned, and so, you know, I'm kind of coming from a place where, you know, I got into that relationship through a matching site, and then the one long-term relationship I was in before that was through yet another the same type of dating site. So I, you know, typically got, you know, that's become the de facto way for me, and I'm something, you know, I fit into a weird age group, right? I'm not a millennial, I'm not a boomer. I guess that makes me Generation X. So I've done a fair amount of what you would consider organized, somewhat disorganized dating. And still, but I've never been signed up for 4 or 5 apps. I mean, I think I used 1 or 2 sites at a time before, and now it's try this, try that. And well, it's part of our culture too. Like, try something for a little while and then quit it. You know, it doesn't stick. But but Corinne, as you mentioned, you know, you made a point that people aren't quite ready for us. You know, something along those lines. We're kind of, I guess, until we reach the point when that changes, we are women who are ahead of our time.
I suppose that's true, yeah. But I think at least
that, right?
Unlike an awful lot of
quite a distinction.
Yeah, I think we might be among the women who will see a change in times to come within our own lifetimes, I guess. Yeah. Maybe more likely your lifetime than mine. I don't know.
I've already seen a lot of.
I've got 15 years on her. But
we've both seen a lot of the changes. I mean, when you look at just the way the 90s were, there is the kind of acceptance there is for trans and non-binary people in 2020, such as it is still orders of magnitude better than it was in the mid 90s,
Mm-hmm.
25 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
What
True enough.
what
Yeah.
advice would you give for those who are just realizing that they're trans or that they want to come out?
My first advice would be to start talking to someone. Uh, find if they haven't already, talk to find a good local person who specializes in as being a gender therapist or is knowledgeable. Already has trans
Mm-hmm.
clients. Start talking and start working with someone who you can bounce this off of and have this discussion and make sure this is what you really want to do. I mean, chances are, if one who is considering that is probably somewhat serious, but it pays to do a lot of homework. I think to look at all the different angles of how your life will be impacted. And in order to do that, really the best thing to do is to talk to other trans people. You can, find a support group either online or in person in your area. Try to talk to as many other people as possible to hear
Mm-hmm.
their coming out stories, their experiences, get an idea of what day-to-day life might be like and kind of what you're in for. And you might be surprised. You might either find that, wow, there's a lot here I didn't think of, and
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be one thing. Or you may find, in the case as it was in my case, like, oh, this is actually more doable than I thought. I kind of had felt for many years that transitioning to a woman was going to just, I don't know how to say this, need more I was under the impression that the surgery was kind of a mandatory step, sort of like you kind of had to go all the way to complete your
Hmm.
transition. And my thinking on that was due to poor quality of information available at the time and incomplete. We have the internet, so that's another place to do research. So by talking
You're
to
also
people,
you're also getting some attitudes from a lot further back too, in back in the 60s and 70s and so forth, when gender reassignment was first getting started, and doctors made it feel like you should do everything you can to pass, because they wanted you to come out as feminine as possible and vanish from their lives, so that they didn't, risk being exposed as the doctor who took care of this person. There was some danger of that, especially for surgeons and so forth. It's not as bad now. Sorry to butt in, but I think that's part of what goes on with that. It's not mandatory to do the surgery now.
definitely
But there's a lot
not.
of, yeah, yeah.
So
There used to
things
be a
like
much
that.
more. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
What would you say, Corinne? What advice would you have coming from your perspective on someone who's just thinking of
Mm-hmm.
coming out?
Well, on top of what you've already said, which is that they should try to find somebody, look for counselors in the area. I don't know if I can drop the name of a counseling outfit that they could go to
Certainly,
on the
certainly.
podcast. Is that allowed?
Yes.
Okay. I would recommend Landmark Health Services. Dr. Jared Massey there. He's a psychiatrist, and he's excellent. He's a very good, very sensitive, intelligent guy. Very up with GID, gender confirmation, and so forth. He also has a very good MHC, mental health counselor up there named Matt Couch, who I've also had quite a few good sessions with. Good guys. And they have quite a few other services worth looking into. So they're right downtown in Buffalo on Edward at the corner of Franklin. I think it's 396 Edward. But Landmark Health, you can find them online. Then on top of that, in addition to what Marissa was saying, I would also say, go and educate yourself. Go find books. Go find text about and read some biographies. There's some really interesting ones out there. You know, be as well versed as you can be about what it's like to be a transgender person. And if that's you, then continue to study, because there's plenty to learn as to how you live this life. And I think that's very important. It's a lot easier to find stuff now. When I started fussing around and looking for a counselor in transitioning, I found a counselor with Catholic Charities back in '94. And he said, frankly, I don't know much about this at all, but I'd be very happy to get you some information. And he photocopied some things that he found in a few books at the Kinesis Library or something like that had to do with transgender surgery and so forth back in the '90s. And it was pretty thin. And now there's just an incredible wealth of information and stuff that you can, every aspect of it, from the hormones to the surgery to taking voice lessons to having all manner of plastic surgery done. I mean, if you want to and you have the physical stamina and the health and the money, it's alarming the number of things they can do to put you through the change. But not all of us really want to go through that much either. We're not trying to turn into somebody's trophy wife. We're just trying to be enough feminine for us to feel grounded in who we are.
Mm-hmm.
That this is it. This is a real thing now, and I can deal with this better than I could in my life before. Living to some degree camouflaged, by a gender that was never mine to begin with. So. Other than that, I guess that's about it for the advice.
Okay, in
And
wrapping up,
don't
any
go into.
go on, go ahead.
I was going to say, don't actually go into sex work unless you don't have any other recourse, because it's just very dangerous right now. And maybe in a more open world that'll change, but right now. It's true that so many transgender people get in trouble or are killed, and that's been in the thousands over the last 20 years. And it's a hate crime, and it's also turning out to be very hard to get some police departments to do anything about that. So not saying anything, just putting it out there.
Yeah.
You do have to be careful. I think especially younger people who are exploring their authentic gender for the first time probably take some risks, because the young do. But you can take a risk and wind up with the wrong people or in the wrong place very, very easily. But, like
I'm losing you a
from
little bit, Corinne.
Omaha, Nebraska affair. Oh, okay. Careful. Be always conscious of what could happen. You have to be situationally aware and alert, no matter who you are today. But I think that especially applies to transgenders and LGBT in general.
Okay, so before we're done with the live stream, any final thoughts? Things you want to share? Plugs?
Plugs.
Let's see. Okay. Is this where I put? In other
Yes,
words,
make sure you're close to your Wi-Fi signal too.
I think I've lost people. Something's interrupting everything. I lost you for a second too. Maybe I
Oh,
do have to get closer over here. Okay.
I've got you very clear now.
Okay, you got me now?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay. All right. So I'll just do this really quickly then. I have a book coming out on Kindle. So far, it's an ebook. I will be bumping it up to print on demand pretty soon too. And it's called A Long Way Down from the Roof. It's about 203 pages, and it's a memoir of my experiences so far from day one at around age 13 to now. And I actually, a friend of mine looked it up to see if anybody had reviewed it on Goodreads, and they had, by golly. So that's beginning to surface as, you know, a modern classic, I'm sure. But that's on Kindle, and I'll be keeping people informed about future books as they come out, because as I'm retired now, it's time to be a writer, and that's what I'm dipping into here. So
Any final thoughts from you, Marissa?
Just one more about the process of transitioning. Just one more thing to add from that last topic a moment ago. It's not a race. It's not something you have to feel pressure to rush into if you do decide to transition or come out. There's no prize for finishing it first or better than somebody else. Proceed at your own comfort and pace. Don't feel pressure, and